how did you progress sort of over your career to be able to afford that time and be able to make a living through that? Was it all through photography and selling those photos? Did you have any other type of businesses as you go around? Because Dave and I have talked about in terms of how we survive, doing a lot of ocean research and stuff, and going back and forth to starting businesses and this and that. How did your especially the early parts of your career kind of progress through that evolution?
So when I started working with those trek fishermen, the guys with the beach seine nets, in 1991, we caught a little great white shark in those nets. And it was still the smallest great white shark I've ever seen. It was 1.58 meters in length. So what's that, 6 feet or so, a real tiny little thing. And I still remember I went into the nets and I carried a little great white shark like this out, and I tagged the shark, and I took the tagging data to the only group that were working with white sharks in South Africa at the time. And they were called the White Shark Research Institute, and they were actually headed up by a very famous great white shark hunter who had turned green. And they could see here was this crazy young guy who was super keen about sharks. And they offered me a volunteer position with them. So I volunteered with them for 4 years, didn't get paid a cent. I had a mother who very kindly still allowed me to stay at home, so I had a roof over my head. But I used to go and walk the local beaches at 4 o'clock in the morning to pick up a certain type of shell called a nautilus shell. And then I used to basically hitch a ride to another area to go collect fossilized shark teeth. And I eventually saved up enough money. I also used to illegally dive golf balls out from the local golf club when they hit them in the hole, and I used to sell those. And I built up enough money to buy my own share of a little inflatable boat. It was only around about just under 12 foot long. And having worked with the White Shark Research Institute at a place called Dyer Island off Gansbaai, a very famous white shark location, I learned a lot about the white sharks from Theo and Craig Ferreira and others at the time. I had amazing exposure to these animals. And in 1993, we worked on a show called BBC Wildlife on One with David Attenborough. It was called Great White Shark, still one of the most beautiful shark shows ever made. And in that show, there was a chap by the name of Scott Anderson at the Farallon Islands. And he was casting a surfboard off the rocks and winding it in, and a shark came and lunged it on the surface. And that gave me an idea to make a seal-shaped decoy, essentially, and put it in the water and see what happened. And at Gansbaai, funny enough, we never towed the thing. We put it in the water, and the shark showed quite a lot of interest in it. But I thought, well, let me go try at Seal Island. And Seal Island is about, let's see, if you know where Cape Town is, it's about half an hour from Cape Town, so it's a lot closer to where I stayed. And I'd asked a lot of people if there are great whites there, and they said, well, they don't see them there, they see them inshore. But what we had learned from Gansbaai and in Dyer Island was that the white sharks were predominantly at the seal colonies in winter, and no one had ever gone to Seal Island in False Bay in winter. So I managed to convince a couple of friends who were pretty gullible at the time to come out in the rubber boat with me, and we illegally launched. I did a lot of illegal things when I was young, but we illegally launched off one of Cape Town's beaches, and we went out to Seal Island, and I put a little yellow life jacket, roughly the size of a seal, behind the life jacket, and we started towing it, and I didn't really expect anything to happen. And literally 30 seconds after we put it in the water, a really small great white, also, only probably around about just over 2 meters in length, which was very rare for Seal Island, we had learned in later years, came flying out the water. And we looked at this and we couldn't believe what we had seen. And the shark spat the decoy out. And I went up to it and got it again and tied it on. And two of the guys, there were four of us on board, they were like adamant, we're going home. Another mate of mine, Robert, he was with me, and he said, no, well, we can stay. So it was 2 against 2, and I was holding the tiller of the boat, so we were staying. And put this little life jacket out, and we towed it for about half an hour, and nothing. And then a proper great white. So the only time I could ever say the shark was bigger than the boat, around about 3.8 meters or so in length, so about 12 foot, came flying out the water, spat the decoy out, then started circling the rubber duck. And no amount of convincing could get my friends to stay there. So we headed back. But obviously the penny had dropped that not only were there great whites there, but flying great whites. And yeah, so it was obviously a monumental discovery for us. And the big problem for us came about now, how do we keep this quiet? Because my friend and I, we had very little money. I just saved up enough to buy a rubber boat, for goodness sakes. And he was delivering pizzas at the time to make money. So we carried on trying to make a few beans, and eventually we kept things quiet. We only took out friends that we essentially swore to secrecy, otherwise we'd feed them to the sharks, right? And we eventually saved up enough money to buy a fiberglass boat, so a proper boat that was about 20 foot in length. And then we started taking out local or foreign tourists who were locally in the area, and once again telling them to not tell anybody, because if local people had boats and tourism operators found out, we would have been crushed, and you would have had a circus developing there. And we used to go to such lengths as we'd actually cover eventually we had a ramshackle cage made that would not pass any health and safety regulations. And we used to cover the cage with tarpaulin. And anybody who looked under the cage, we used to tell them that was a giant lobster trap. And we came up with all sorts of BS to get our way around. But anyhow, one of the guests shot some video footage of this, and they were probably really excited when they got back to the States, and it got leaked to National Geographic. And at the time, Peter Benchley, as you know, the famous author of Jaws, they were working on a movie celebrating Jaws. I think this was 1999, so probably would have been for the 25th anniversary or something like that of Jaws. And together with David Dubélé, who was one of the most famous underwater photographers, Rodney Fox, the most famous shark attack victim, Rocky Strong, who Dave will remember, who was a very famous shark scientist at the time. They were all part of this crew, so they came out. And I still remember Peter Benchley writing that two young boys with a very rich imagination had lured him to Seal Island, and he couldn't believe that such things could happen. And we took them out, and sure enough, these things did happen. Sharks did fly there, and that really, put Seal Island on the map, so to speak. And from then onwards, it was a flood of people wanting to come and see. And the phone literally rang off the hook with all the biggest documentary crews in the world.